Sorry. Range, you're on mute. Sorry.
Magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Welcome to the third day of the 14th PLC. I'm Range Gonzalez, your moderator this morning. So we'll hear for this first panel today, members of SIL who will talk about SIL's language education and development and translation services in this pandemic. Specifically, they will share the innovations made of the methods and processes in producing the expected or desired outputs together with SIL partners in the different projects it is currently involved in. Most of the presentations will also feature tools that SIL is using with its local partners in accomplishing the tasks at hand. So our first uh, presenter is Ms. Cecil Osorio Banzante. She is a literacy and education consultant of SIL Philippines. Her training and 11 years of experience assisting the implementation of mother tongue-based multilingual education in advocacy, curriculum adaptation, learning materials development, and teachers training has given her a strong grasp of putting MPD MLE principles into practice and applying these principles in language development and language in education. So she will talk about developing a skeleton primer, a multi-strategy approach. Then Manny Tamayo will follow. He is the library and archives manager at SIL Philippines. He helps manage and archive the 60 plus years worth of language data collected by SIL, making it accessible and available to researchers and language communities. Manny has 3 years of experience as a certified Bloom trainer. He is consultant and member of the training team for DepEd's ABC Plus project with USAID, RTI, and SIL Lead. Currently, Manny is pursuing his master's degree in library and information science at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. And I'll be the third presenter. I am a language assessment consultant in training with SIL. I'm working on language assessment and documentation. I'm also involved in ethnologue data review and consultant in community-based language development related activities. I also assist SIL Philippines literacy and education team in facilitating MTB MLE workshops under the IPED program. Currently, I'm also a PhD linguistics student at UP Diliman. And our last presenter is Roger Stone. He's an SIL linguist who has done field research with the Aita Abelen and Aita Mag-Indi people. He is also a Bible translation consultant and has been a consultant for the translation of the New Testament into both of these Aita languages. His master's thesis used computational tools for analyzing and describing Aita languages. So before Ms. Cecil Vanzante will start, take note of your questions and comments, and we'll deal with them later after all the presentations. So let's all welcome Ms. Cecil Vanzante.
Good morning. Morning to everybody. I'll be presenting the work on developing a skeleton primer, which uses the multi-strategy approach or method. Here is the outline of my presentation. Next slide, please. First, I will be stating the purpose of the online workshop, then the work needed before the actual workshop. Then during the workshop, I have given time to discuss the principles behind the method, followed by the main process of the workshop, then giving time to explain the full primer or primer and the expected output. First, let me discuss the purpose of the online workshop. The online workshop was sponsored by a consortium assisting Department of Education. It's ABC Plus project, RTI as the main implementer. Next slide, please. Its ultimate goal is to produce supplementary reading materials focusing on both decodable and leveled readers using SIL Lead's Bloom application. It's a free app. Manny will be discussing more about that later. So now about what are the prerequisites before the online workshop? First, a must before any workshop is done, the availability of the orthography of the target language. That's the first one. And then we need to have gathered corpus to be used as data for the workshop, which at least should consist of 5,000 combined corpus of grade 1 text or stories that are made for grade 1 students. And then part of the requirement would be submitting a list of picturable words. Participants will submit this ahead of time. So these are the word lists of possible keywords, and I'll be discussing more about keywords later, or we call it picturable words. Next. So what is multi-strategy method? This is part of the workshop. First, during the workshop, I have discussed, or I will be discussing, bottom-up versus top-down approach, and then the pioneer work of primer using multi-strategy method. This is basically the historical background of primer or primer. And then during the workshop, time is given to explain the different approaches that educators use in teaching reading to learners. Of course, I have mentioned historical background of the multi-strategy method, and finally, how the principles are applied in a teacher's guide, which will be the resource material. But this is only for the face-to-face workshop. So the output of this online workshop is not the full teacher's guide, but just the skeleton. So I'll be discussing that more later. Next. So next, I'll have information about the primer. So during the workshop, the primer's information, what is a primer, will be discussed, as well as the qualities of a primer. And then during the workshop, also examples of a full primer will be given, and then the keyword and key picture will be discussed further, so that the participants know exactly what are those categories. And then it is also explained during the workshop why is it important that multi-strategy approach will be used in the Philippine context. And then finally, what parts of a full primer are covered in a skeleton primer. So now we will go to the online workshop process. So first, you will see the app that will be used during the workshop, and this is called Primer Prep application. This is a free SIL software. First, we will incorporate the corpus gathered into this app. So you can see in this example, the Kinaraya text being processed. You can see the word, the tab open right now is the word discovery, and you can see parts of the screen for a Primer app. On the right part of the application, the screen, the window, you can see how productive a word may be. So you can see how what is the most productive word in the language. And then next is the next part of the workshop will or of this presentation will take up the skeleton primer process, and you can see that the first process will be identifying keyword, and then the second will be sentence making. The third is identifying word list. So we will generate word list. And the final part of it is selection of key features. So this process, we will repeat this process until all the sounds, symbols, letters of the language are represented in the lessons. Next. So part of the online workshop process, we will use the word list from the participants. This is to help identify keywords. Why? So during the workshop, the list that the participants submitted before the workshop will be used to assess the difficult task, the challenging task of identifying words that can easily be recognized by grade 1 students, using 2 to 3 letters only for the first word or first lesson. So this is a bit challenging, and usually it will take a good chunk of time in order to identify a good picturable word that can easily be recognized by students. And then whenever possible, just adding one more letter at a time. Preferably, the position of that letter should be at the start of a word or at the start of the syllable. And then a chart will be used to document the lesson plan sequence of every sound and symbol, and the words can be built, including, or the words that can be built, including as a sight word, so that a sentence can be made. Part of the workshop is to make sure that the keywords can be identified by the grade 1 students, so online illustration testing is embedded in this process. So we will choose possible key picture of the words identified, and then it will be tested with the target students. Next. So what are the expected output of the workshop? First, we will see there will be a lesson plan, a chart. Here's an example of the actual output of one of the workshops. So you can see that there are lesson number, and then the new symbol being taught to the students, the keyword, the sentence making word, which should be used to use your. So you can see that this keyword and sentence making word should be part of the key sentence. Okay, and then the next part is the decodable stages for the Bloom app. So here is an example of the output. So you can see from the previous slide where all the letters and symbols are identified, and then the sequence of these letters or symbols are arranged into 6 stages. And then you can see that each stage will have a sight word assigned to it. Means that this is the only sight word will be used for these letters on a certain stage in making decodable books. And then so that will be so I'm just focusing now on the decodable stages. For the actual workshop of developing supplementary reading materials, we are making decodable and labeled readers. But this part of identifying the sequence and the stages only covers the materials that are decodable, so that every stage the children will just read the letters that has been taught to them, not any more than that. So that's about the developing a skeleton primer. So probably you might ask how long a full primer would take. Usually the full primer would take around 2 to probably 3 weeks face-to-face workshop. This skeleton primer took us around 2.5 to 3 days. But of course, it's not the full primer. It's just the skeleton, so that we will be able to identify the sequence of the symbols for the decodable readers that we will be developing afterwards. So that's all about the developing primer skeleton. You can reach me through this email, cecilbanzante@sil.org, for any of your questions. Thank you.
Let's now hear from Mr.
So, good morning everyone. Magandang umaga po sa lahat. Let me share my screen po. So, I'll be discussing Bloom and Blooming through Online Materials Development Workshop. So, what happened? So, let me discuss first what is Bloom. Bloom is a free computer program or a tool for making decodable books or making books easily. It doesn't require computer experience or less training needed. And it will get more people to write books in their local languages, and it will fill the need for reading materials in their local languages. So this is the theme of Bloom. Let's grow a library. And Bloom makes it easy to create simple books, translate, and contextualize them into multiple languages. So these are the acclaims or the awards given to Bloom. They're the winner of All Children Reading Grand Challenge. They're the winner of Begin with Books. They are the awardee of Million Lives Club, also a featured innovator of All Children Reading, and a winner of Book Boost Access for All Challenge. What are the Bloom strengths? Bloom is a good choice when the writers have limited computing skills or computer skills, when the book design is fairly simple, and for adapting existing books and translate them from one language to another and culture, and for creating decodable and labeled books, and also for providing writers with variety of
Mr. Manny,
templates.
can you share your screen?
Oops, it's not sharing. Sorry. Share. Kinabahan na. Okay na? Sorry. Should I start again? Sorry. So let me repeat this slide. Uh, Bloom is a good choice when the writers have limited computing skills and when the book design is fairly simple, and it's also a good choice for adapting existing books to another language and culture, and for creating decodable and leveled books, and also for providing writers with a variety of templates. And there's some Bloom simplicity and some intentional limitations of Bloom. The text does not flow from one page to another. Limited layout capacity. It's not easy to create tables. The text is limited to uh, going plain, bold, italic, underline, creating superscript, and you cannot create highlights or no color options. And Bloom doesn't have an editing tool aside from cropping, and you need to edit the illustration first on a third-party software before pasting it in. Here's the website of Bloom. You can go to bloomlibrary.org. So in the website, there are tons of shellbook sources or shellbook materials that you can download and use. And in the Bloom itself, there's a lot of templates that you can use also. There's a basic book, there's a big book, there's a decodable reader, leveled reader. You can create a picture dictionary. There's a sign language template also, and there's an arithmetic template also. So in Bloom, you can create multilingual books. And the beauty of Bloom also is you don't need to manage your documents. It's only all just a click away. And also, you can effortless create booklets in Bloom, PDF booklets. And there are tons of black and white illustrations from the Art of Reading collection. There are other features of Bloom. You can create picture dictionaries, and you can easily add complex non-Roman script. You can create an ebooks. You can record your story to make it as a talking book. You can publish it as an EPUB or using a Bloom Reader Android app. And you can also add comprehension quizzes at the end. In 2018, Bloom was with the awards and awards given and funds given to the SIL lead. It was developed more for additional features, and Bloom is now can create books for everyone because you can create materials for our brothers and sisters with disability, with those who are blind. You can add image description tool in Bloom. You can create a sign language. It has a sign language tool. It has a motion tool. It also has a music tool. And if you're visually impaired and if you have cataract, this is what your screen looks like. And if you have red or green color blindness, this is what your screen looks like. And if you have blue and yellow, this is what your screen will look like. And if you are completely visually color blind, this is what your screen will look like. So how are the workshops being done during the pandemic or during the materials development? So these are the things that we did. We used Google Classroom for our participants. We created different lessons, basically 9 lessons, the basic ones, and included links, videos, manuals, and screenshots that they can use. We create more instructional videos and upload it on YouTube. we introduced a different Bloom version because we needed a new functionality. So we introduce a beta version for them, for some of the participants. And we did Bloom in Zoom and created group chats and different messenger, WhatsApp. And during the face-to-face, this is our training approach. We usually do the gradual release method, or the I do, we do, and you do. So during the traditional approach or the face-to-face approach, the I do, participants first see the instructor presents a Bloom feature, and the we do part, participants perform the task together with the instructor, and during the you do part, participants do the task by themselves. But during the online workshops, this is our approach. We still use the I do, we do, and you do methodology. So the I do, during the I do session, participants, instead of us presenting, they will watch an instructional video or read a manual of a Bloom feature. Next, during the we do session, participants performs the task by sharing his or her screen with the help of the instructor. And during the you do task, participants do the task by themselves and submit a screenshot or upload a file of their output. And these are the challenges. For facilitators, learning new technology or other technologies or other applications and other apps is a high learning curve. It requires also training and learning. And for some of us, it's a challenge. And recording instructional videos were very challenging. Creating a 12-minute video, sometimes it will take you 3 to 4 days just to create a 12-minute video. And huge number of participants require more supports. During these online workshops, we can cater a lot of participants, but having a huge number of participants requires more support. And for participants, using Google Classroom, most of them, it's new. And for using corporate or institutional Gmail accounts, it has limitations in signing up in Google Classroom. Taking screenshots and uploading files is also a challenge for them. Internet connectivity is really a challenge to most of the participants. And there are still some areas in the Philippines that it will, in a day, there are 7 times power interruptions within the day, sometimes 8 times. Yeah. So sometimes whole day of power interruptions. And also the computer compatibility in handling Bloom and Zoom at the same time. And these are our learnings. For facilitators and participants, having a diverse locations of facilitators is helpful, especially when unnecessary events happen. Just like last November, when there's a typhoon, at least 2 of the facilitators were affected because of the typhoon. But thankfully, there are other 2 facilitators available in Visayas and Mindanao. We're able to continue the workshop. Having an online workshop requires a lot of patience. And also, the online workshop is doable and can be effective as face-to-face. Having health breaks is a must, or a must. And it's also essential to have profiling so that you can include technical specifications and computer literacy assessment of the participants. Thank you. Maraming salamat po. And my email is manny_tamayaw@sil.org.
Thank you, Sir Manny. Muntik na naman akong mam-mute. So, The next presenter will be me. I'll be talking about no fieldwork linguistic data collection. Wait lang. So fieldwork in
as
the
much
pandemic
as it is a public health issue. Travel restrictions have been placed to prevent the spread of the virus. As a researcher, there's no way around it. We have to stay at home and prevent the spread of the disease, especially to the communities we plan to visit for fieldwork. However, we can't just do nothing. For various reasons, we must continue to collect data. Personally, I am intent on figuring out a way of collecting data remotely for my dissertation. My goal in this presentation is to share my journey in remote data gathering, something which I am still struggling to accept and implement given the fieldwork protocols I am used to. In this presentation, I'll be talking briefly about my fieldwork background and how I am trying to navigate a no fieldwork data collection, particularly with the Nag-Ilaog communities of Ilocos Norte and Ilocos Sur. I will also share how I plan to move forward in this journey. My fieldwork experience started more than 10 years ago with language survey. A few years later, our team also started doing language documentation. It wasn't a difficult transition for us because the two requires the same basic skill set when it comes to community engagement, planning, and data collection. But doing language documentation made us more intentional with the quality, types, and amount of data we collect, while being opportunistic, doing our best to record when an opportunity comes. Having a low quality recording is better than nothing, right? Especially now. Those who are doing fieldwork can relate to this. I remember before we venture out into the field, whether we have been invited to assist by the community itself or another agency, we do a lot of secondary research, groundwork, planning, preparing the tools and equipment we'll use, and also training those who will be helping us in the community. During field work, we have to be in the moment, heart, mind, body, and soul, open for any change of plans, ready with the tools, equipment, and other supplies needed to carry out the field work. Usually, we go around the community looking for people, but depending on how committed and organized the community is, sometimes the people we need were brought to us, or we are invited to go to someone's house or document a cultural event in the community. Considering my personal experience and my knowledge of best practices in language documentation, I have grappled with the idea of collecting data by not doing fieldwork or remotely during this pandemic. Perhaps some of you are asking, why are you even thinking of collecting data at this time? Because I want to graduate na po, and I believe I can still collect data good enough for more post-syntactic descriptions. Allow me to give a little background why I think this remote data collection could work. The Itneg Ilaud communities are in the provinces of Abra, Ilocos Norte, and Ilocos Sur. The language is still spoken by all generations, but not everyone is speaking it, especially the children. The Ilauds are currently working on their 4 minima requirements for MTB-MLE implementation. Besides the basic grammar produced as part of the 4 minima requirement in Region 1, there is no other description of the language that is available. I also have to mention that since 2018, SIL has been supporting the Ilaud communities in Ilocos Sur and Ilocos Norte through the regional IPED program. I am assigned to serve as consultant for this group. Luard Zubiri also worked with this group in one workshop while I work with the Ibaloy team. Most importantly, I have also become friends with some teachers and elders of the community. Thoughts of how I'll be able to execute remote data collection kept me up at night for some time. I asked how will I be able to collect the data I need, considering the amount, the type, and the quality. And also, how do I keep the work ethical and collaborative? I've had methodological and ethical issues about the idea of remote data collection, really. So what types of data am I talking about? According to Berger et al., a basic language documentation corpus that could be used for various purposes contains elicited lists, communicative events or speech events, analytical discussions, and cultural events. The elicited list includes word list and grammatical paradigms or sentence list. Communicative events, on the other hand, may vary from culture to culture, but the usual categories include interactive discourse or conversations, narratives, procedural discourse, oratory, reporting, or expository discourse, drama, poetry, and song lyrics or verse and formulaic discourse. In all of this, it was said that conversations are the most frequently occurring and therefore should make up the bulk of the corpus. It also reflects most of the core linguistic structure being the most frequent type of communicative event. And for a more accurate description of how the language is actually used, it is the interactive discourse that would reveal the patterns of language use across generations, provided that you have the right samples. In the succeeding discussion, I will just focus on the communicative event types of data. The table presents how much of each data type will be collected, measured by hours of recording, relative to the total amount of corpus that needs to be collected. The communicative events should be at least 10 hours worth of textual recording, with a huge portion of it being interactive discourse or conversations, according to Berger et al. I know that the corpus should be representative of all speech types. However, doing data collection remotely does not give me access to unplanned types of communication events nor occasional cultural events. That's why I did not include them in my priority list anymore. So the length of each recording may vary, but the point for putting an average time is to make sure that the goal of getting a proportionate representative sample will be achieved. When doing language documentation, this includes, of course, audio, visual, and written text. Berger et al. Advised to pursue relevant, usable data, natural data, data in context, shareable data, which of course include the metadata, and clear recordings. Although we are limited in some ways, we can still achieve significant things in a purposeful data gathering. We just have to keep these principles in mind. So when recording, we have to capture a signal that has sufficient quality for the intended product and its use, and sufficient quality for the processing necessary to achieve that product. In general, we want to capture the best quality audio data, for example, recording in 16 or 24-bit depth, that WAV file, because down sampling is possible if you'll be using an MP3 file later. But when you already recorded in MP3, it will be hard to manipulate the quality of the recording. The principle also asks us to consider how we will process the data and the end product. Is your input signal readable to the software you will be using? Recording principle 2 says that we must record so that meaningful information is easily discernible above the contextual noise. We have to make sure our recording is clear and crisp, especially if you intend to use it for acoustic phonetics. Unfortunately, web-based recording and recording using cell phones will not give us this quality. According to Sankar et al., compression, background noise, and other factors affects your format measurements. We normally work with a community member, usually a leader who serves as our advocate or coordinator and helps us with groundwork. I would also need one or more and a research assistant who can help with annotation because I do not speak the language. And of course, I need speakers of the language as language consultants who will serve as contributors of text and validators of the text and other output. All of these people have to be proficient L1 speakers. Grenoble 2020 describes proficient L1 speakers as native speakers or traditional speakers that have acquired the full grammar of a language and actively use it regularly, and may be multilingual and highly proficient in multiple languages. L1 proficiency varies by age of acquisition and currency of L1 use, also by location, topic, and the participants in the conversation, and even across one's lifespan, language proficiency varies. Now, focusing on the contributors, I need proficient L1 speakers. They also have to be from different age groups because I want to describe how the language is actually being used in the community. Besides, the Itneg Ilaud communities are shifting multilingual communities now. It is already impossible to find a pure Ilaud language nor find a monolingual speaker. On another level, data coming from a multi-generational sample is more inclusive and relevant to many kinds of speakers and users. Particularly in the context of Itneg Ilaud, a grammar would be useful for MTB-MLE. A puristic view of language, valorizing the elders, would marginalize the other groups. At this stage of language endangerment of Ilaud and the desire to revitalize the language, we cannot marginalize the younger speakers and say they do not speak proper Itneg. We will lose them if we don't value them as speakers of the language too. So aside from coming from different age groups, I'm also looking for contributors coming from different speech communities. This would help the sense of ownership of the community towards the project. So where am I now in this journey? I am blessed and grateful that I have a very supportive community behind me. Shout out to Sir Nick and Sir Johnny who are patiently helping me navigate through this endeavor. So before I decided to work on Itneg, I had to ask the opinions of the elders and also their consent about doing a grammar. Fortunately, they believed that this grammar I will be writing would be beneficial for the community and the MTB-MLE program. I think it helped that we've been working together for quite some time now. Another thing that is helpful in making this remote data collection work is that the elders are taking the initiative in many ways. They are introducing me to other members of the community, particularly the elders from other municipalities whom I have not yet met through the iPad program. They are also helping me think of ways on how to record text. We are actually trying out different platforms for recording, and they are even suggesting we have a dry run first before including others in the conference calls. Also, even if they are busy because they are school heads, we chat so we could analyze little things about their language. I'm glad that they are excited as I am with our little discoveries in their language. What have worked so far in terms of doing interviews, particularly pre-elicitation interviews? Facebook chat or video calls is a great way of doing unstructured interviews. I have not yet asked about birthdays or age yet, but I'm sure we'll get there once I am more focused on data gathering. As for informed consent, pre-pandemic it's usually written. But now, self-video recording by participants or with the researcher during video calls is the norm. One elder even suggested we do it by raising hands during Zoom or Google Meet sessions with a group because we are planning to record conversations via these platforms. As far as equipment is concerned, mobile phones with or without external microphones for video recording is good enough. So they would send this video recording through Facebook Messenger or email. Recording through video conferencing platforms is actually easier, but the connectivity problem is a challenge. I think for recruitment and training of research assistants, it would take more effort to train remotely, considering connectivity and availability of equipment. So my current workflow here starts with the input, which could either be an audio recording online or offline. So if it's online, I would be recording it, but if it's offline, the contributor will be recording it and sending it to me through Facebook, email, or Google Drive. So this file is imported to Say More for data management, for recording metadata, segmenting, and transcription. So from Say More, you could generate a text file, which you could then import to Flex, which is my tool for linguistic analysis. Example, you have an audio file like this.
Nabalo nga wakasyo wawagi. Kalayad ko man nga istoryaan ton kabibiyag ko no kasano nga binalbaliwan ni Apo Diyos daton nagmamadi nga biyag ko.
The next step is to import it to Say More, which allows you to create a bundle of files from the original recording. Once you have your file, you can do a transcription if you know the language and translation as well. So this transcription is the text file you can upload to Flex. You can copy and paste it to the baseline panel and move to the Analyze tab to do analysis. So for example, some items have already been analyzed because some of these lexicons have already been analyzed previously. Moving forward, these are what I would like to do next. Try other modes like Skype, Clean Feed, and others. Also engage the younger loudspeakers, although already discussed this with some of the leaders. Also, I need to structure or streamline my data gathering workflow, my way of recording informed consent, and doing pre-elicitation interviews. Recruitment and training, the use of Say More or Elan and even Flex, if possible, should be started soon because I've already collected some audio files and I should start working on them as soon as possible. Also, I think it would be good to recruit somebody from the field who can coordinate recording with the speakers of the language in the community.
I'm considering of making my workflow more collaborative and easier to manage by working on the same document with members of the community. For example, I can send an ELAN file to the community from Say More, and they can work on this on ELAN. They don't have to keep a huge file like I do with Say More. Flex has a send receive capability, which is good for linguistic analysis together with consultants from the community.
In conclusion, I think remote data collection is easier with good relationship and right contacts who are sold out to the project. It is also important to know your goals and your limitations when considering collecting data remotely. It is helpful also to have a research plan drafted with the community so they know what to expect and what still needs to be done. And for the purpose of describing Morphle syntax, I think you can collect a good enough data remotely. But note that the usefulness of the data collected this way is limited, unlike when you do real language documentation. But this is all we can manage at this time. So I think for now, this would be enough. So even if this remote data collection would work out for me, I would still be happy going to the community to do fieldwork, perhaps language documentation with them. I think that's all. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so our last presenter is Roger Stone. We'll talk about software used for translation.
Good morning po. As was mentioned, I'm a linguist focusing primarily on the Aita languages of the Sambal language family. In addition to linguistics and lexical work, I've also had the privilege of helping the Aita Magindi Bible Translation Committee with their translation of the New Testament scriptures. This project was completed and launched quietly and safely on June 9, 2021. The mother tongue translators and I had worked together as a team to manually translate the 7,954 verses of the New Testament, where the mother tongue translators drafted each verse from scratch, and then we worked together through the extensive checking procedures to ensure accuracy and naturalness before sending the final text to the Philippine Bible Society for printing. As the New Testament project was finishing, the Aita Magindi community spiritual leaders requested that the whole Old Testament be done as well. It had taken more than 10 years to do the New Testament manually, and now the community was requesting the whole Old Testament as well. Ay nako, the Old Testament is 23,145 verses, a much bigger proposition. Just with the simple math, we could see that doing it manually would take almost another 29 years to finish the whole Old Testament. At that rate, baka mamamatay na ako bago matapos. So we looked at other possible ways of translating the Old Testament, namely computational ones, as we were already familiar with the manual approach. A popular machine translation method today is statistical machine translation, or SMT. This is what Google Translate used from 2007 to 2016. This, though, requires a large parallel text corpora. While Aita Magindi has some interlinearized text, it has nowhere near the amount of parallel corpora needed for SMT. Many major machine translation initiatives, including Google, have shifted to neural machine translation. This is an approach that uses an artificial neural network to predict the likelihood of a sequence of words, typically modeling entire sentences this way. While there are experiments being done with NMT on minority languages, especially ones that already have one or more large documents translated with parallel corpora, it is still questionable if this technology can apply to linguistically under-resourced minority languages. There's also a financial cost involved. These technologies are not cheap. So for those reasons, NMT isn't really an option for Aita Magindi translation, or at least not at this time. That leaves rule-based machine translation, which is based on linguistic information about source and target languages that is retrieved from dictionaries and grammars, covering the main semantic, morphological, and syntactic regularities of each language. Since it depends on having a grammar and syntax analysis for the target language as well as a lexicon, the Aita Magindi language has enough resources. There is one such rules-based machine translation system designed primarily for Bible translation, although not limited to Bible translation, which we'll mention later. It is called the Bible Translator's Assistant, or TBTA, which is what I will call it through the rest of the presentation. In truth, even before the end of the New Testament project, we had already had communication with the developer of TBTA, Dr. Todd Allman, who had lived in the Philippines for the past several years. And we had begun the process of encoding the Aita Magindi grammar and lexicon into TBTA. When the pandemic began to really take effect, we were left wondering what could be done to respond to the community's request for the Old Testament. At times, group committee work in an office was not considered safe or even allowed. Lockdowns allowed us focused time, though, to learn how to encode the grammar and lexicon for Aita Magindi into the TBTA software, with the help of Dr. Allman. The rules and grammar are by no means perfect, but we have at least during quarantine, we were able to develop it to the point of being functional for machine translation. So in quarantine, we began using TBTA for generating first drafts of Old Testament scriptures, beginning with the book of Genesis. But first, before we get into results, I will explain the basics of how this system works. The main components of the TBTA system are the semantic representation, the ontology, lexicon, transfer grammar, and synthesis grammar. We will look at each in turn. The first key component is the semantic representation of the Old Testament Hebrew text. The computer needs to be taught to understand at a very deep linguistic level the semantics of each proposition. To do this, the scripture text is written in a simplified form of English. For example, Genesis 12:4 reads in the simplified version, "So Abraham obeyed the Lord and left Haran. Lot also went with Abram. At that time, Abram was 75 years old." This is what is input into a semantic analyzer, which then automatically assigns linguistic tags to words. For example, each noun is marked for number, person, polarity, gender, common versus proper, etc. Verbs are tagged with features like time, aspect, mood. Other features that get tagged include participant tracking, proximity, semantic role, time, aspect, mood, reflexivity, polarity, illocutionary force, discourse genre, salience band, etc. Each of the letters underneath the main words represent a feature. Another base component of TBTA is the ontology. The ontology consists of approximately 2,000 semantically simple English concepts. These concepts include the universal semantic primitives identified by the natural semantic meta-language theorists Anna Wiersbeke and Cliff Goddard, and the defining vocabulary of the Longman Dictionary serves as the semantic molecules. The concepts are organized into 7 semantic categories. Each concept is very precisely defined and used in consistent environments throughout all of the semantic representations. Many of the concepts have multiple senses. For example, the ontology includes 2 senses of go. One of them is the sense of to move from one place to another, and the other one is a region's border goes from one place to another. The verb say has 6 different senses to cover senses like direct speech, non-direct speech, indirect speech, etc. And the verb to be has 25 different senses. Theta grids for verbs are part of the ontology. Theta grids are basically the argument structure for specific verbs. So for the verb go, the argument structure specifies that there is always an agent-like NP, or noun phrase, and then optional source NP and optional destination NP. That's part of the ontology. The TBTA software comes already with semantic representations of source biblical books, and the ontology is already in place. As for the parts that the user has to encode, an obvious significant one is the target lexicon. Each entry in the ontology needs to be paired with an entry in the target lexicon. The lexicon is a repository of all the target language words and their associated features and forms. The lexicon has 7 syntactic categories: nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, adpositions, conjunctions, and particles. For each syntactic category, features and forms can be defined that are pertinent to the target language. So each target noun may be assigned a gender value, an honorifics value, a class value, etc. The various forms of each target word are generated by lexical spell-out rules, which are able to add inflectional affixes and perform morphophonemic operations. So a lot of linguistic information is contained in the lexicon. Semantic concepts in the ontology are linked to the corresponding lexemes in the target language and the way those forms will be generated. But if this was all there is, then we would just get a very literal word-for-word translation, and that would be all that's possible, like what you see on the screen. That leads to the next part. The transferred grammar is responsible for restructuring the semantic representations to produce new underlying deep structure representations. So the transfer grammar contains rules that generate grammatical relations from semantic roles, perform theta grid adjustments for certain verbs, build clause chains, and correct collocational clashes, and etc. After the transfer grammar has been executed for a particular text, the result is a new underlying deep structure representation. A sample transfer grammar rule from our sentence in Genesis 12:4 is one that changes the 2 words in English go with to a single word, kilako, which is like makisama or sumama in Tagalog. Without this rule, the output would literally be 2 words, go followed by with, but in Magindi, this rule changes this to a single word. Also at the transfer grammar level is where Philippine language focus or voice is handled. A series of 59 ordered rules were written by Dr. Allman for Tagalog in order to use contextual linguistic clues to determine the appropriate focus or voice for a given sentence. We have adapted those rules to Aita Magindi because for the most part, they produce the correct focus or voice. It's not 100%, but it may be 80%. The synthesizing grammar is responsible for synthesizing the final surface forms of the target language text. The synthesizing grammar contains rules that mark agreement, select lexical forms, add all the contextual affixation, order the constituents appropriately, perform morphophonemic operations, identify where pronoun or switch reference markers may be used, and it inserts punctuation. The input to the synthesizing grammar is the deep structure representation produced by the transfer grammar, and the output of the synthesizing grammar is actual text in Aita Magindi. For example, since the focus or voice was set in the transfer grammar, that information is now used in the synthesizing grammar to insert the correct case markers for each noun phrase. In our example, this is the rule that inserts the case marker for the absolutive proper noun C before the name Lot. It also is what inserts the case marker for the oblique proper noun Kan before Abram. Another important thing that needs to happen is the reordering of phrases because of the VSO structure of Aita Magindi. TBTA uses phrase structure rules to know how to order phrases in the clause. For example, this PSR shows that except for a few specifically marked cases of adverb phrases and preverbal NPs, the verb phrase comes first. When we put all these things together and generate this one sentence, the simple sentence, we get kilako at silat kan Abram. The verb is in fact placed before the particle ut, meaning also, and before the NP silat. So the computer was able to output a sentence with the correct focus or voice and the correct word order. But that doesn't mean that this is the final version. A text can be grammatically correct and clear, but still might not be natural. Quality translation still needs human input. In the case of translating scripture, the text is first reviewed and edited by mother tongue speakers. Our example sentence came from an early iteration of the grammar. The mother tongue speakers changed kilako to the complete form makilako. And they changed the full noun phrase kan Abram to the pronominal form kana, or to him, because Abram's name was in the immediate context. Both of these changes are the ones that better lexical entries and better pronominal rules would have made unnecessary. After the text is edited by mother tongue speakers, it is then tested for comprehension through questions. It tested in the community. In the case of our example sentence, the correct answer was given by community members, so no corrections were necessary. Finally, the text of the book of Genesis was sent to a Bible translation consultant. In the case of this simple verse, no accuracy corrections were suggested by the consultant. We began this process of translation at a time when it was deemed safe to be together in the same office building and work with social distancing. For the last 2 months, though, I've been here in the US while the mother tongue translator team in the Philippines continues to work. TBTA outputs a draft that I send to the team through the internet. They edit it, then we collaborate together remotely on best questions to ask for comprehension checking. And after they have run checks with close family and we have made any adjustments necessary, we send it to a consultant for checking. So by and large, this process is proving to be pandemic proof. How do we evaluate the results of this kind of approach to translation? First, in evaluating the results of this approach to translation, I think 3 questions are pertinent. Does this really save time? Does it make the translation better? And does it empower mother tongue speakers to do translation? In answer to the first question, the team was able to edit approximately 1 verse every 2 minutes throughout the whole book of Genesis, resulting in an overall increase in speed for the whole process of about 30 to 40%. The drafting itself is certainly faster, and as the grammar gets refined over time, it will get even faster. Regarding the question of whether it makes the translation better or not, the answer would seem to be that it should. It is, of course, possible for mother tongue translators to make changes to the text that introduce inconsistencies. That happens at times, but overall, having the first draft output key terms consistently results in a more consistent and thus better translation. As to whether it empowers mother tongue speakers, I think the answer is obvious, that it does. Most Bible translation organizations would look at the educational level of the Aita Magindi translators we work with and say they may not be qualified to be independent Bible translators. This use of linguistics and software helps level the field so that sharp mother tongue translators can do great work on their own. What are things that can be developed further with TBTA in the Philippines and around the world? Currently, there are only 3 Philippine languages with grammars encoded: Tagalog, Aita Magindi, and Eastern Subanan, which is a work in progress. While these 3 grammars are at points where they can generate useful draft text, the development process remains cyclical, meaning that refinements to the grammar rules are made in response to seeing edits made by the mother tongue translators. Each round of editing produces refinements to the lexicon and rules, thus making better generated text in future outputs. So while these 3 are functional, they still can be made better. There can also be grammatical development in more Philippine languages. Because of the interrelatedness of Philippine languages, it is possible to adapt one grammar to another, swapping out the lexicon, of course, and it can be done fairly rapidly. In fact, that is what has been done for both Aita Magindi and Eastern Subanan. The Tagalog grammar was used as a starting point for the grammatical rules and adapted as needed. While TBTA was developed with Bible translation in mind, it was never intended to be limited to Bible translation. Any text worth making available in multiple languages can be developed into a semantic representation and then generated into any language with a developed grammar. Some ideas of genres that could be turned into semantic representations and translated to other languages include health materials, school textbooks, how-to manuals, stories, etc. There really isn't anything limiting how wide its application could be if we can only imagine. So how much does this software cost? Actually, it's free for download at the All the Word website. Also available there are numerous academic papers about how the system works, as well as links to more than 100 free videos documenting how to use the software. In conclusion, TBTA is a new powerful linguistic tool. TBTA can produce clear and accurate translations of a source text into any language of the world. TBTA's range of use is not limited to Bible translation. It can be useful for any important text that should be shared to multiple languages. This type of machine translation in conjunction with human editing is feasible even in a pandemic. Maraming salamat po.
Okay, maraming salamat din, Ka Roger. May nakita ako sa comments kanina that some people are now interested to do Bible translation. So for those of you who are interested, contact Roger Stone. So the time has come. My colleagues are now ready to answer your questions. Alright. The first question is for Ma'am Cecil from Gulshan Ara. Is there a step to integrate words into sentence as well?
Yes. In my presentation, I have this skeleton primer process. The step 2 of this incorporates incorporating the keyword into sentences, but we also incorporate the sentence making word, which needs to be modifying the keyword so that it will go well with. Basically, the second step is the incorporating these words into sentences. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecil. So usually added the sentence making words are prepositions or case markers.
Actually, it's like adjective, adverb that modifies the keyword para mas bagay so that it's picturable a sentence. Yun.
So hindi siya noun phrase.
Usually yun ang keyword.
So next question. Oh, it's for me. Oh, my comment si Tina. She said she has the same dilemma, and one of the problems in doing remote field work is how little control you have in data collection. It's not just you, but you're relying on people. Yes, I agree. That's why I think in my Facebook comments, I would say na ang kapal-kapal na ng mukha ko for asking too much from the members of the community. And ayun, so she also said na many remote communities also don't have stable internet connection or even mobile connection. There are also interviews or recordings you need to collect in person. That's true. And I had to restructure my research massively to get around not doing field work. We really need to be flexible in these trying times. Dami kong hugot. Buti naman nakaka-relate tayo pa sa issue na to. I feel you, Ma'am Tina. Are there more questions? So another comment from Jacqueline Haggins from Palawan. She said, Range mentioned ethical considerations. The data does not belong to the researcher or field worker. The data belongs to the language community. Permission and care must be acquired and considered at all times. I agree, Ma'am Jackie. Oh, there's another question. Can we download these tools in our Android phones? Which of the tools can be downloaded to?
The Bloom has a Bloom Reader app for Androids, but the Bloom editing software or the tool itself, it's only for Windows and Linux versions.
Ayun po. So, Bloom lang so far. So, from Rohan Taduran, anyone can answer this question. How do you deal with writing uncommon sounds like velar fricatives in Viracnon or schwa, schwa-like sounds in Karaya or inland Bicol?
I think it's the community, the people group who will decide on that with some help from people. But I think ultimately, bottom line, but are they asking for specific symbol?
Not really.
Common sound, yeah, okay. Maybe you or Roger can answer that better.
Actually,
Which
in Laon has a schwa, but they decided to write it as like the ordinary E because they don't have E in their phonemic system. It's easier to write. They tried other symbols, fancier symbols, but when they started encoding uh, text in their language, they realized mahirap palang gamitin yung mga symbols na yun. So they settled for the letter E.
I think that one's for me. I presented a simplified version of all the checks that go into Bible translation. There's actually more checks that go to make sure that the integrity is maintained. There are checks, like I mentioned, in the community to test understanding to make sure the text is understood properly. There are also checks versus the original languages like Hebrew or Greek, as well as checks by an outside consultant. So there's multiple ways that the integrity is maintained. It's a longer process than I actually stated. Yes, oftentimes it's chopped into smaller chunks and then kind of put back together in the source semantic representation. But complex sentences can be done, but they are more difficult.
Well, there's another question here. How much time and money do you spend to immerse in the community to gather your corpus of materials? So far, I have not spent my own money for field work since I'm doing it as part of my role in SIL. But normally, you would budget for travel and other personal expenses. It's such a blessing that in my stay in Kalinga, they really accommodated me like a member of the family. So I usually when I go to town, I just buy supplies to bring back to my foster home. So the question, Mom Range, because you do not speak the language of the community, is your language consultant or assistant the one doing the translation for you to do the morphosyntactic analysis? Thank you. For this particular study, yeah, I have done analysis on written text, basically the text that we've already collected prior to this online data data collection. I usually ask help from my ITNEG friends in doing it, but at least I have already a sense of the lexicon and the syntax because I worked with them on their basic grammar. And my knowledge of Ilocano and Kalinga also helps me with ITNEG. Thank you.
Actually, neither one. We don't use Tagalog or English as the primary text. The primary source is the original language of Hebrew or Greek, but in manual translation, we get a lot of ideas from the Tagalog and English versions. We look at all of them or use an eclectic approach. When we do manual, when we use the machine-based translation, we start with a draft that came from the computer, and then we still look at Tagalog and English versions for checking and getting ideas still, but the source source authority is still the Hebrew or Greek, depending on what which testament is being translated.
Another one for you, Mr. Roger.
Those are all difficult. Whenever you have a unknown concept, there are varying strategies depending on translation style. Sometimes you will say this is like something else. Sometimes there might be a substitute of something that has the same cultural idea. But those things, each one has to be done carefully. Sometimes it's explained in a phrase rather than one word. It's not a one size fits all answer. It's there are different ways of handling terms with no equivalent. Yeah, Jacqueline, I was hoping no one would ask that question, but you did. I would not really recommend TBTA for poetry. The meaning will come out, but it won't sound poetic. It's impossible at this point. I can tell you what we've come up with, but for the team that we work with, that may not be the best fit for every single translation team in the world. But we get the first draft, edited it. I mean, now we're getting it from the computer. Mother tongue speakers edit that draft. Then we have a couple of biblical language people look at it, look at the draft, and give input about accuracy. And then we write those comprehension check questions, take it out in the community, make sure that what we think is being communicated is being communicated. Somewhere in there, we also check certain key terms to make sure we're consistent. And we use computer tools to do that. And then we send it off after we're content that it's good. Then we send it off to an outside consultant to further check it. And then we added one more step after that. For the Aita Magindi, the pastors in the area wanted to check it as well and give feedback. And so that's our last step. But that's just our system.
Okay, so last question for Roger again.
Okay. Like I kind of mentioned in my presentation, the advantages are, I think it can empower people that are good at writing in their language, but may not have a seminary background and may not be able to produce a a great first draft on their own. Is it more reliable? It can be. Like I also mentioned, things can go wrong if the mother tongue translators change meaning, and you have to go back and fix that. The advantage also, it can be faster to do it using machine translation.
Okay, so so there's another one. Ati says it.
I think it's Roger, right?
No, are Primer, Prep, and Bloom used for localization for the MTB MLE?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we're using it for the teaching reading for the L1.
Mhm.
We're creating decodable and leveled readers also for different languages now for MTB-MLE.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess that's it. Thank you for everyone who joined us this morning. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your participation, and thank you for staying with us. So this afternoon, join us again for the fourth uh, panel about Philippine lexicography through the ages. And tomorrow morning, we also would like to promote disaster dialogues, analyzing multivocal experiences of disaster narrated through various media. So keep tuning in, and you'll learn more. You'll not be disappointed. Okay, so see you later at 2 p.m. Thank you again. Thank you very much, and magandang hapon.